Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern, looking at life through a biblical lens, solving all the world's problems in 2 hours or less, taking your calls, answering your questions. Have you seen the Bernie Sanders crowds? They're mostly young adults. What is it that's attracting them? Well, in a word, it's called socialism. They love it. They haven't got a clue what it is. All you have to do is look at their birth dates. Did you know that the average American is 35 years of age? The average American was born in 1995. I have power tools I bought in 1963. 9/11 is probably the first time most of these children, young adults, thought anything about life outside their own desires or outside their own pleasures, their own circle of friends. But then that's not a new thing, is it? That's what we did. It's what everybody does. In America in 2016, it appears that young adults are bent on destruction. They seem to care nothing about the values that made America strong, if they even know what they are. They seem to be divided between destroying their minds and their bodies with drugs, sex, music, whatever, and grabbing hold of every so-called healthy diet and activity known to mankind. They have abandoned or forsaken the traditional family structure in favor of whatever seems to work for their situation today. They've abandoned the traditional values of their forefathers. They've abandoned Christianity for either a reasonable facsimile or nothing. They seem to demand the proverbial something for nothing, and they're willing to follow anybody who says they'll make it happen. Enter Bernie Sanders, avowed socialist, running for president on the Democrat ticket, validating those who have maintained for decades that the Democrat Party is socialist. I know they say Democratic Party, but there's nothing democratic about the Democrat Party. It is a socialist party in a loose disguise and is now appealing to the 30-somethings who have no idea what America is, was, and don't care. He's raising money from individual contributions in amounts that rival the big donors from both parties. He's openly advocating free everything because America's wealthy and they can afford it, or because it's just simply the right thing to do. Politics in America has switched from a free market philosophy to something more akin to socialism itself. Hence the ability for young people to not see the difference. In 1965, Democrat President Lyndon Baines Johnson announced his Great Society Plan. In 1992, a Democrat president by the name of Clinton tried to govern according to those principles. In 1995, same Democrat president was forced to abandon those principles in something Dick Morris characterized as triangulation, a policy that pits Republican against Republican as the Democrat president moves just far enough right to embrace enough Republicans to help him with his policies, since he helped them with theirs. Wasn't what his wife wanted, she of Hillary care, but it was enough to make him one of America's most beloved presidents and to get him 2 terms. And the point? The young people, enamored of Sanders and Trump, by the way, don't remember 1995. They don't remember 1965. Their context, their education is limited to the last 20, maybe 40 years, I doubt. They grew up during a time when the educational system had been taken over by progressives, raised and educated in the 1960s. Entire historic periods were ignored or modified during their time in school. Values were crafted, shaded toward a more humanistic philosophy. Christian teachings, values, principles were outlawed. Barbaric practices have been mainstreamed and embraced as normal. It's like what? Like abortion for personal pleasure. Sex with anything or anyone. Marriage to anyone of any gender. Transgenderism. Drugging children who have behavioral problems, probably because of parental structures and diets, but problems that parents can't or won't take the time to handle. The drugging of adults who are stressed, anxious, depressed for almost any reason. Surgical procedures for anything you want, if you can afford it. And if you're on Medicare or Social Security or you're in prison, we'll pay for it. You can be any gender you want. You can now be any form of animal or demon you want. And no one can discriminate against you because of it. Young people believe they're entitled to a higher education, to job training, to jobs, for no reason other than they're here and they need it. And you, working people, can afford it. No, not their parents, but everybody else. Where did all these ideas come from? They came from philosophical values. Values that were suggested by academicians and others. They come from educators, clergy, theoretical scientists, cartoons, TV shows. Ideas and ideals that are supported by official policy, by official practice, and even laws, which over time have become our new normal. Let me show you how it works. Once upon a time, the world revolved around the Word of God. Yes, it did. And then sin entered the system. Genesis chapter 3. The world then endured a series of conquerors and potentates. And along came finally Persia, Greece, and Rome. In Europe, there were kings and barons who dominated the peasants. We call it the feudal system. Once the feudal system faded and men were not simply dominating one another, certain philosophies began to emerge that generally defined at least European life. Sometime around the 13th, 14th century AD, there was a rebirth of learning and discovery. Philosophers named it the Renaissance. Fancy French word for rebirth. Reality? The Muslims, a new religion from Arabia, had moved on what we now know as Turkey, which at the time was Roman Constantinople, because Constantine had moved his capital over there in 300, 330, whatever it was, 380 AD, creating an eastern version of the Roman Empire. Keep in mind, if you're doing any history, we're talking about 1200 AD, but back in 800 AD, Pope Leo crowned the French king Charlemagne king of the Holy Roman Empire, creating a stranglehold on Europe for the next 700 years. Not by Charlemagne, by the Roman Catholic Church. An influence that limited learning and development to what the church thought right and good. In the East, Constantinople used to be Byzantium. Now it's Istanbul, Turkey. But Constantinople was the capital city of Roman authority for over 1,000 years, a city of learning, invention, art, literature. Hagia Sophia, once a church, later a mosque, now a museum in the Turkish Republic, served as the visible representation of both education and religion. In 1204, Constantinople was finally sacked by the Muslims. They'd been at it for a while. This was during the Fourth Crusade, and it drove Roman government out of Constantinople. It would take another 230 years to finally drive Roman influence and power from the face of the earth. It would be in the 1490s. With the conquest of Constantinople comes a second renaissance in the minds of some historians. During this time, the educated, the scientists, the inventors, the educators, theologians, artists, and others fled the region, migrating toward Rome through Europe. With them came their knowledge and their skills, now invading the well-controlled regions dominated by the Roman Catholic Church. History notes the surge in education, invention, exploration during this time period. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. There was also a lot of superstition and mysticism associated with it. It's a period known as the Middle Ages. Names like Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, a sculptor, Machiavelli, de Medici, and Savonarola, who at the end of this period was preaching against the worldliness and the paganism of the Renaissance. These people are all attached to this time period. For example, Michelangelo was born at the end of the Renaissance. I think his birthday was like 1490 something or other. And he was a product. He grew up with that influence heavy in his world. And when you look at his paintings and statuary, he was doing largely religious themes because they were the ones paying him. But the statuary and the art has a heavily sexually suggestive tint. That was a product of this time period. Well, what did the Renaissance do? Well, it stimulated a great deal in terms of education and values and discovery, explanation of new continents, growth in commerce, invention. Paper was invented, along with printing, movable type, and the Bible was the first book printed in this new way. The mariner's compass was invented, and gunpowder. China did that, but it was the same time period. There was the telescope, the mechanical clock, flushing toilets, and graded eyeglass lenses, along with an underwater warship, a submarine. For the intelligentsia, it was a time of revival of classical learning and wisdom. For the Roman Catholic Church, it was a time of solidifying their hold on the faithful through a system they called the Inquisition, which went on for another 400 years. Following this period came what philosophers called the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason, historians say, was the beginning of an open society where individuals were free to pursue individual happiness and liberty. Politically and socially, the imperial concepts of the medieval world were abandoned. The Age of Reason is also referred to as the Age of Enlightenment, which can confuse you if you're not paying too much attention. It resides somewhere between 16 and 1800 AD. It followed the mysticism, the religion, the superstition of the Middle Ages. The Age of Reason, historians say, represented a genesis in the way man viewed himself. It was the pursuit of knowledge and the universe, wherein man's previously held concepts of conduct, thought, could now be challenged verbally and in written form. Fears of being labeled a heretic or being burned at the stake were passé. They were done. Keep in mind the Roman Catholic Church was not done. The inquisitors continued right through into the late 19th century, 1800s. but maybe not as enthusiastically or as universally as once they did. The point here is that from the mysticism of the Middle Ages to the humanism of the Age of Reason to the revolution of the Reformation in 1520, European mankind was moving through the natural processes. Then God arrested his soul. The Reformation had a tremendous impact on European religion, politics, social reform over the next 300 years. It spawned the various forms of democratic governments we find primarily in Europe, but in other countries as well. It spawned the birth of these United States. Our founding fathers are routinely maligned for the fact that they did not claim to be Christians. Well, the truth is many of them were not. But many of them were. Christianity's expression then is not the same as Christianity's expression now. The truth is these men all had a much higher view of God and morality than many Christians do today. And many groups came because they were being persecuted as a result of being Christians. The Industrial Revolution was an expression of religious reformation. The elimination of slavery in Europe and in the U.S. was an expression of religious reformation. The abolitionists were Christians on both continents and worked steadily over a 50 or 100-year period before it was finally gone. The framers of our Constitution could not ban slavery for fear the southern colonies would not join and thereby fatally weaken this new nation before it ever got started. But they did plan to revisit the issue in the early 1800s. That the politics of that time did not allow it is a large part of why the abolitionists became so active. That and the fact that Great Britain had recently banned slavery herself. In those days, unsaved men quoted the Bible the way folks do today from Shakespeare. Unsaved men were willing to die for biblical principles of social and political philosophy in life. It's a period philosophers like to call the modern era, beginning in the 1800s. Now, a lot of us didn't think about modern until the 1950s or 60s. But thoroughly modern Millie was in the 20s with the flappers. And some of us call modern today. But modernity is over. We moved out of modernity into postmodernism, and then we moved into postmodernism. We're running out of ways to talk about this thing. Suffice it to say, philosophically, morally, religiously, and politically, we are adrift. It started when we changed the rules. Today, words no longer mean what they meant when they were written. I get to interpret them my way. Morality, right, wrong, is no longer defined in absolute terms, meaning by God. History no longer reflects real events, only what I believed happened. Can you say global warming? Education is no longer an understanding of established facts or events or systems. Everything's wide open. Whatever you want it to be. We're no longer teaching world history to our children. We begin after the war between the states. I said world history, I meant U.S. history. Why did we start teaching after the war between the states? Because to begin earlier would of necessity include the principles, if not the history of the Reformation, the escape from religious tyranny that brought the Pilgrims and the Puritans to this continent, the faith, the experiences of these God-oriented people. Much is made about how these so-called Christians introduced slavery to the colonies. Truth? There were no slaves in the northern colonies. The northern colonies were settled by various sorts of Christians, from Maryland's Roman Catholics to Massachusetts Puritans to Pennsylvania Quakers, although Quakers are not technically Christian. The southern colonies were more a mixed bag of British, Irish, Scots. The southern colonists were not escaping religious persecution. They might have been escaping the law in some cases, and largely the poverty that they faced in Europe. None of this is really known to young people today, and the young people today don't care about it. None of this is being reflected in how we live or how we seek to govern ourselves. We're adrift in a leaky boat, being driven by the winds of circumstance and desire onto shoals and rocks we can't even see. We have no historical context, so we have no allegiance except to ourselves. We have no religious boundaries. Therefore, we have no objective standards of morality. We have no political understanding. Therefore, we have no context for the decisions we make. Every generation is making a decision about life that later on jumps up and bites them because they haven't considered what other people did and what it meant to them. And they don't even care. They don't care in large part because they don't know. They don't know what we faced in the 1940s from fascism. They do not know what we faced in the 1950s from Chinese, Korean communism. They don't know what we faced in the 1960s from communism, Vietnam. They don't know how radical the Great Society Initiative really was. A Democrat president from Texas, a man who led the charge against giving black folks their rights in the 1950s. A man who was the head of the party that was responsible for Selma and for the KKK, for lynchings and routine dehumanizing of black folks. A pragmatic politician now presenting to Congress a plan to pay these folks for not working. Well, it wasn't their fault. And to give them health care. Well, it's only right. A plan that is pure communism, collectivism, by a man who was pragmatic. A plan that has strapped our economy for the last 60 years without producing even one of the many things that it promised. We have more people in poverty today than ever before. According to the record, the government record, poverty in America dropped dramatically after World War II. I'm talking 1949. The chart shows a 45-degree down line after the war for 20 years. Lyndon Johnson proposed his Great Society Initiative, and then beginning in 1970, 1973, poverty began to rise. It has continued on a very slight up angle ever since. All this while the average household income rates were steadily climbing at a steep 45-degree angle up. Conclusion? It appears if we had left things alone, poor families would have done better. Of course, there's a lot of variables here, too many to be dogmatic, but the principles here, when people have to do, they will. When they don't, they won't. The socialist system has never worked anywhere it's been tried because it violates this basic principle. Not to mention the wealth and the power that accrues to those who administer the program. Are you listening to the Panama Papers? These guys are embarrassed. The rich and the powerful leaders of industry and government have got money stashed away all over the world. They're not putting their money in the stuff they want you to put your money in. It's estimated that our own president had a net worth estimated maybe $1.9 million when he went into office. He might have had more. Maybe even $6 million. But today it's estimated that they have a net worth of over 12 million. How do you get that much money in 7 years on a $400,000 salary? I don't know. He's still got a home in Chicago. They estimate a mortgage is anywhere from $500,000 to $1,000,000 he still owes on that. That's got to be $70,000 worth of mortgage and taxes every year. He's got to pay a lot of his own bills, things. Kids are in school, private school, to all sorts of things he's got to put out. He's probably putting out $100,000 a year. He's pulling in $400,000 plus a $50,000 entertainment thing. 7 years, and he's accumulated between $5 and $8 million. It boggles the mind. But you see, it can work. Our president, senators, legislators, judges, government workers of all sorts get lifetime pensions. The president gets his pension, $200,000 a year, the minute he walks out of the White House. As soon as the oath of office is taken by the next guy or gal, he starts getting paid $200,000 a year and gets Secret Service protection for the rest of his life, and I think his wife too. There are people in our world who cannot earn a salary for a lot of reasons. But if you can watch for fires and intruders and pick up a phone to tell somebody it's happening, you can work. If you can answer a phone, you can work. If you can't make enough money, the government will help you. But we now have people running for office who are promising young people and older people too the sun, the moon, and the stars. The young people don't know it won't work. The older people ought to. The young people expect to have a college education, whether they're equipped for it or can afford it or not. They expect to have a good paying job, and they ought to have it right out of high school or college. They expect to have all their parents have now in the first 2 years of life. They want to be able to play without worrying about tomorrow. They want tomorrow to be prosperous and satisfied. But they don't want to earn any of it because they deserve better. The young people in the 1960s didn't have any of these attitudes. The young people in the 1980s were starting to get them. What changed? It isn't people. People have always been the same. What changed was our leadership and the foolishness that they do to get elected and to make money. The day's coming when ordinary people are going to have to get real creative. When having a skill, a few dollars in the bank, a home, a job is going to make the difference between life and death. The Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump young people, they're not going to be ready. They don't even know what's going on. Between 1969 and 2009, there were 7 presidents. 2 of them were Democrats. One was Jimmy Carter. Carter didn't have a clue. The other was Bill Clinton. The first 2 years were crazy. The last 6, not so bad. But we may never see a Ronald Reagan again. We may never see a Dwight Eisenhower again or a George W. Bush. Some of you say, I hope not. They did more for us, even Nixon, for all his nonsense, did more for us than Jimmy Carter even thought about. And certainly more than Barack Obama. America's not like it was in the 1950s and the 1960s, not even like it was in the 1980s. But things are getting bad. In a few years, it will take a military-style police force just to control the population. We're very close to that now. Have you seen the military equipment and weapons these police officers are using? Have you listened to them complaining they don't have enough? Remember the commercial? This is truly not your father's Oldsmobile.